welcome back. It's now 8 minutes after 7 o'clock, and we've been joined on Open Your Eyes by attorney at law, Audrey Matura. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Please add that I'm an activist more than an attorney. I'm an activist with a law degree.
Well, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Now, Audrey, the state of emergency has been something that we've been talking about, for the last month. It has waxed and waned in terms of its conversation and the breadth of it. But let's go back just to look at it in terms of a real intervention or a band-aid treatment.
I think that it is a false sense of security that has been given to the populace. And I posted on Facebook that I want to thank all the young men who gave up their freedom for the false sense of security that we've been given to our people, because now 30 days will soon lapse, and when they come out, what? How much more enraged, how much more upset, how much more knowing that they've been violated if the reports I've received behind the prison, because I was not allowed to go see any of my clients behind prison, which is another issue. But if the reports I receive are true, that they've been beaten, that they've been pepper sprayed, that they've been put in holes, well, we call it hole like when you put in a room with one little window. If they've been treated like that, then something is really wrong. And it means that we don't want to go to the root of the problem. My theory, and I'm no expert in everything, but my theory is that when we look at these criminal elements, as we'll call them for the purpose of the show, they didn't become a criminal overnight. You have to look at early childhood development in this country, where many of these kids grow up abandoned, neglected, and abused. You're only capable of meting out that kind of pain and injury and have that sense of not care if that's how your first 7 years were. And nobody wants to look at the root of the problem, the social root of the problem. Somebody doesn't take a gun overnight and could kill somebody. That doesn't happen overnight. And so when you abuse them further, you're only making them worse, because they only know how to respond to violence, they only know how to respond to abuse, and they respond the only way they know, by fighting back. We have a social problem that we are trying to solve with an unjust law.
Now, you said something that triggered a thought for me. I'm not into, I won't attempt to use the words in terms of legal language, but one of the things that I thought about was, in other places you'd see attorneys taking the government to court on behalf of the young men who were incarcerated. I don't know what you call that process, right? Why didn't we see that kind of a response from attorneys? While you did have your activists who stepped in, for me it looked like a business kind of a thing for the majority of attorneys, as opposed to coming from a human rights perspective to really say, okay, even though they cannot afford them, they're disadvantaged members of society, we should step up as a legal community to challenge our government, to say, because that is a part of the system as well.
Well, this is my theory. As you notice, the Bar Association sent out a very weak press release. It's unfortunate because of several reasons. The same person who is the head of the Bar Association is the DPP, and under the legislation, under this new amendment, it empowers them to, the DPP, to direct investigation into any gang-related activity. So now I believe she's in a position of conflict of interest. How can you head the bar that should take a stance against these issues on purely legal and human rights standing, and you are the same person who will eventually have to prosecute them? I think that's wrong. The other one is, I noticed that a lot of attacks went against some of us attorneys who stood up for these people, but it's because of the level of ignorance, and I mean ignorance not that people are stupid, but that they don't know the process of what it is and what's the role of an attorney. And that's also because, unfortunately, in Belize, where we have over 200 attorneys on the roll, it's only 4 or 5 of us will step forward and do certain things. And people don't understand that most attorneys are in the civil section or the commercial section, that's where you make money. You don't make money on criminal matters. You don't make money on constitutional matters. You don't make money challenging the system. You make money as an attorney sitting in an office and processing all those big deals with people like Michael Ashcroft to begin with. That's where you make the money. And so it's this everybody wants to find someone to blame instead of saying, let me look at the landscape. What is there? Whose role should be in place? What's your role? Who's doing what they should do? People don't want to look at that because the fear and the anger, they just jump up and say, yes, yes. And that's part of the problem, that if people would understand the system, they would know that what is happening is really an injustice, not only to the young men, you know, even to them, because it's an injustice to you when you don't deliver to your society under the laws that you've created that you've never used. When you don't deliver to your society basic information as to how the legal process works. There's a lot of misinformation, and instead of us saying, okay, that era of just jumping to conclusion is over, let's go through the proper step, it's made worse now, because now we have operatives of the National Security Department, the minister, the deputized commissioner, and even the CEO. They're taking these stands publicly at press conferences and saying untoward things. And I'm very discouraged that one of them is a trained attorney who should know better, because that's part of your training. Now you're not only acting as a police officer, you're acting as an attorney, and an attorney has a higher standard upon which you should operate, and that's not happening.
May I interject quickly? And I don't want to necessarily digress from what you're saying. My position as a member of society, and of course as a reporter, has always been that, in my opinion, I believe that all of this has now become a legal argument as opposed to something that reflects some level of sociological
intervention.
Yes. So that's my angle
I
would want to.
Absolutely agree with you. Honestly, although I deal with the legal aspect, remember what I start by saying, that it's from early childhood. I estimate in this country that at least 90% of our population has been abused at childhood, and of that 90%, at least 70% of that 90% has been sexual abuse. And we're not talking about it. Right now, we know about the women coming forward, and I know quite a few, but we're not talking about the men coming forward. You all will know that growing up in Belize City, you could walk the street sometimes and you see kids being beaten by their moms on the street. And some of the nastiest thing, and the one I hate the worst, like they like to say, you're just like your effing pa. Like they take out whatever anger they had towards the men on these boys. And that is why many times the reason you see the mother and the ones covering for the son is just a sense of guilt. And then when you look at, when you peel the layer, that same mother has been abused. So abuse begets abuse. So I am with you on that. It is a sociological problem, but it cannot be solved in only one way. It has to be solved by the sociological part, the political will, the legal aspect. There has to be legal instruments in place, but fair ones. It has to be the media aspect, because the way the media portrays things is very important. I think we underestimate sometimes the importance of that. It has to be four-pronged. And law enforcement, and I put law enforcement differently, because I believe that the same members of the police department come from the society, and some of them are abused themselves, so they are abusive in their approach of things. It's a cycle where we're a whole community that represents each other, no matter what uniform you wear, what badge you wear, what title you wear. It's the reality of what we're facing, and I'm yet to find the party or the government that says, let me look at crime holistically.
So
but
go ahead.
Based on what Isani said just now, isn't there just a sense of fatigue as well as frustration? I think that you see very often in the media. You know, it's like we throw our hands up, we rush home on a Monday night to watch the news to see who died, as opposed to looking at ways for us to act. We have more a talk shop kind of mentality to issues. And when they remain in the social kind of domain, it's, okay, we'll convene a workshop and we'll talk about it, but then there's no action. Now, when people look at this situation with the state of emergency, that's an action. We may not have liked it, but for some people within the community where you saw this groundswell of violence, it was an action, and it provided a temporary relief.
Yes, but it is a misleading action, right? First, I'll say that if we really wanted true action, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Dr. Gale gave us answers, and so did the Crooks report, if you want true action. And why I say it's a fake action or a misleading action is because there are 11 gangs in this city. 11 known gangs. At some point, some minister and some social worker and people in this administration has met with them. They know them by name. They know all the sections, and that's why they could have cordoned off. So have you stopped and think, why only suppress 2 gangs when there are 11 gangs? And even though those 2 are being suppressed, what is happening with the other 9? Why are they prospering? Who's benefiting? I'm telling you, those guys are still racketeering. So why is it that if you really wanted to deal with gang violence, you do not close down the whole city if that's what you want? But you see, people don't want to stop and think about these things because there is a level of corruption with those who run the street and those who supposedly monitor the street. I'll put it mildly like that. But I'm telling you, I get to deal with all kinds of criminal elements, and you'd be surprised how some are made to prosper, and there are people who benefit from the proceeds of that are higher in power. Think about it, 11 gangs, and we're not suppressing 11.
My angle, and you'll forgive me if I'm
No, I don't mind hearing all the angles.
I feel like it's an important point to raise. So you have 2 respective neighborhoods. You have George Street and you have Ghost Town. We'll describe them as fractured communities, both that are at war with each other. You lock up, right now, I think there are 44 of them that are behind bars.
No, the Gazette says otherwise. Yes, I bought the Gazette, but continue.
Okay. The point that I'm making is, so while you have these young men incarcerated at the moment, are there any interventions being made in those particular neighborhoods so that upon their release, there may be a sort of difference in the way we go about things in those particular areas? Are there any interventions still being offered to them while they are incarcerated so that when they come out, they'll probably have a different outlook on the type of activities that they're engaged in?
No positive
You can't just
intervention.
lock up people and then not have any follow-up or not do anything that allows the situation to be different upon their release.
No follow-up intervention, and like I told you, my reports are that they are being abused at the back. They have people that they figure are the head, and they're being pressured more than others. Also, they have their own problem at the prison because now you have 2 rival sets in a confined space. So every effort has to be made to separate them if you really believe that that's the contention. But I believe the contention is more than them being at each other. It has to do with control of turf. It has to do with the drugs that are coming into the country. It has to do with the guns that are coming into the country. People in law enforcement, certain people know the full story. That plane that came, that we miraculously caught as a gift for our September celebration, that's only 1 in a million, to put it mildly. Like I said before, if you live in the north, which I am from the north, I could tell you every place that it could land. And that's not because I'm a narco trafficker. It's because you know your terrain and you know where these planes land and on whose farm and on which roads can be land and which ones are paved and everything. So going back to what is happening in Belize City and with these so-called 2 gangs, because I still refer them to so-called 2 gangs because it's the government that legitimizes them when they treat them as people that they can sit down and negotiate it. That's mean I recognize you in that entity, then you're making a mockery of the system because then you create laws. I like bringing the laws to show you that it is so extreme. In this legislation that they just amended in April of this year, the Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act, just to say that you're a gang member, even if you can't prove that, just to profess, like, yo, I belong to such and such a gang, is an offense. It's an offense that if you are tried in a magistrate court, you can be getting up to 10 years to 25 years imprisonment. And if you profess to be a gang leader, you can get anything from 25 years to 40 years in prison. Think about that. If you really want to solve this, go after conviction, not a 30-day lockup. And a 30-day lockup of only 2 groups. What happened to the other 9 groups? There were still crimes going on while they were locked up. There were still murders. There were still robberies. And then what was amazing to me is that when we had the press conference, when the police had the press conference, 3 major things jumped out at me. One, Deputy Commissioner Williams said that he knew that people were being extorted. So if you know that, set up this thing. We have so much technology now. I don't even have to be a police, and I know when I want to record something, I just put it on my phone, and you hear the person saying whatever. So how come we've never taken in any of these guys for extortion? But yet the business people say I'm being extorted. 1. 2, he speaks about the reason they ended up having this state of emergency is because the guy Humes was killed, and they picked in two guys to talk to them about it, knowing that they're connected to the murder. And you could always play the clip and you hear what he said. And he spoke to them and he released them, like telling ease things down. And then just after they released them, then the spate of murders continued. Then what does that say to you? You know who they are. You claim you brought them in on that. So then there's all police tactics to get your information out. I mean, it's not only by a confession. How come then that spiraled out of control to the point where the entire society is held at ransom and two communities are then targeted specifically? Then the third one, and I don't have the exact words, but basically he said he knows every shot where it's fired and who fires it. That was the gist of it. Then hello, then you're the key witness. You know where everything is.
Wasn't he speaking figuratively in that sense?
No. You don't get away with figuratively when you're responsible for key things. He's a trained attorney now. He knows the importance of the law of evidence, and he, in a sensitive situation like that, you can't be flippant. You got to be concise, and you will be held responsible for what you say. I'm held responsible for what I say. If I make a mistake, I got to take my licks for that, and I better correct it or apologize. So it's more serious than that. You see, if we make our authorities just get away with, man, it just said like that, then that's where we don't hold them accountable, and it goes back to part of the problem that you're talking about. When you give all that aspect there that you talk about, that's more sociological, it comes down to accountability. Who is responsible for the rehabilitation you're talking about? Who is responsible for the proper intervention? And I go a step further, who's responsible to ensure that the way we deal with early childhood now is being cognizant of the violence children are facing, the violence that children become sensitized to. That's part of the problem we've created, and I've written about this over and over. We've created a culture of violence. Our national psyche accepts abuse. We accept abuse from our leadership, the way they govern us, the way they pass laws, the way they ignore our interests, the way they do what they want, the way they even talk, the way they go in the National Assembly and fight up with each other. Like, it is that ethos of violence is just representative of what's at the bottom, and what's at the bottom just representative of what's at the top. So we have a social problem.
I have two quick questions. One, we see in other Caribbean nations similar state of emergencies being, enacted.
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity, given that you followed it,
yes.
No indictment in any way, to see how they have included other interventions in those communities, or has it been pretty much the same approach that you put it in because it's what you need now? And so even if it's for a month during September when everybody is in a celebratory mood, and you get that reprieve and you can enjoy the activities, that it's worth it.
It's not worth it. Let me tell you, I lived in Jamaica and I lived in Guyana. Both countries that are very violent and have progressively become even more violent, to the point of kidnapping and so, and even Trinidad. I've lived in those countries. And I remember, and this would have been, my first visit to Jamaica was in 1990 as a student. And then I saw that the writing on the wall, this is where Belize is heading to, because of the partisan politics and the payoffs for people to vote, right? And I kept saying, having seen this crystal ball, I would not want Belize to go there. That's why I've been actively involved in pushing back on many issues. So I'll go back from then, from the 1990s when I was in Jamaica and they put in place these very same state of emergencies. It didn't work then. Look, 1990.
They still have some in place now.
Right, 1990. We come almost 30 years into 30 years, and has it changed? It doesn't get worse because it doesn't get better, it gets worse because you cannot solve a social problem with law and violence, because what you're doing is imposing more violence on them. Remember the gang leader, I think it was Dudos or Dudas, whatever, remember when the people even fought for him? Because these people fill a social gap that the government is not filling. Social gap, like putting their kids through school and stuff like that, they actually have this, it's worse there, but we are getting there here. And let me tell you why we're getting there here. I work a lot with young people. The reason I like to do practice criminal law is because I tend to want to work more with the minors, because I'm still hoping that there's a way to intervene and help them. And I must say, I've seen quite a few change their life and go on a better path, but I've seen quite a few from the list I have. Every time in the news and one die, my secretary ticks off. We keep track of the kids we've dealt with, which is like over 65 kids, right? But let me tell you why we are going there. I have quite a few of them, young men. Either both parents have died, one parent have died, their father is in prison, mother is no longer around, a mother on drugs or stuff like that. And those kids end up in some gang with some older guy who provides a house, like almost like a barracks, where they get basic things like food and shelter and clothing. Trust me when I tell you that. That's Gazette. And they tell you plain, these same men put the gun in their hand, and that's all they have to do in return. And then it's like a camaraderie, like 5, 10, 15 of them living together, and like, boy, he not is shot and whatever. Honestly, these are things I can't come and speak out specifically by name, because it's things you get in confidence in your profession, but it's the reality of what's happening. These kids are now, certain people or entity are meeting their needs. There are these so-called leaders that even pay their legal fees, representation, and all of that. I would not have known that. Like, I stumbled on some of those things innocently. But the big issue is not the who, it's that it's happening, and it's on the increase, and it's not happening in one place. A lot of kids are being attended by these bigger people. That's why when you hear the news, you realize that the age of the shooter is far less. Suddenly we went from the 21 to the 19 to the 18 to the bomb. We never even reached 70, we jumped right to 15. That is not coincidence. And if you want to solve the problem, you have to go to the root of the problem.
I'll just take my second question, because this one is very simple. And I think good food for thought based on what Isani said. And we spoke about interventions in particular areas. So how do we agitate for that kind of sober conversation in terms of community? How do we bring people to the table to look at it like, okay, this Band-Aid cannot stretch forever. How do we get the interventions?
I think it cannot all be on the government. Let me tell you why I say that. Sadly, a huge part of the problem are the mothers. The mothers who are losing their sons. They're in denial. There has to be a groundswell at some point where mothers in different communities begin to organize and actually push. There was an attempt when we had Belizeans for Justice, but it became too politicized, and then the government, instead of listening to the key issues they were talking about, did not respond. So it has to be from that angle. I think the schools have a lot to do with it. The teachers, the BNTU had made a demand. One of them was that every school have a counselor, and real valid counselor, because only so we can assess the level of what's going on. We don't have enough therapists and psychiatrists in this country to solve it, so we need counselors. I believe that within the police department there needs to be sensitization as to the issue, because they only know, it's like a soldier that's only trained to kill. They're only trained to do certain things, and it's a time that policing needs to change it. This high-handed approach that the now police leadership is taking, to me, will not solve the problem. It will only aggravate it. It will be fire against fire if we really want a solution. It has to have political will as well. And the churches need to get involved. Like, different entities need to get involved. And the media too, the way the media reports these things is very important. That's why people rush. Like, I don't look at the news. It's shameful when I can process it and when I read it, because the negativity is just too much. It bombards me. I find myself crying over people I don't even know, because when I think about what an awful death that is, what another statistic that is, that could be my son, you know?
To bring this thing full circle before we go to break. If we are to evaluate or assess what has happened over the past 30 days, it all began reportedly with the murder of Shaqiri Weiser. Right? This was the one near Matron Roberts. And
yes.
This triggered all these other incidents.
Was he supposedly gang related?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay.
The point that I'm making here is, a part of that whole development is that his brothers are also among those who have been incarcerated over this 30-day period.
And so are the brothers
grief.
of Humes.
There's grief. Well, Humes are the brothers of Shaqiri Weiser.
Okay, oh, right? That's the same one.
Yeah. But I'm saying here, there is grief, there is anger, there are all these emotions, and they weren't allowed to attend their sibling's funeral. So they were in the lockup for the 7 days at the Queen Street precinct, and then trooped off to the Belize Central Prison. Now, these are reported gang members. They are locked up amongst their peers or what have you, their colleagues. My question is, has there been anything to address the fact that when these young men come out, they won't want to seek revenge, they won't want to kick up dust, as we say? That is my question, because at the end of the day, it's a human issue. We're dealing with raw emotions and people who have a legitimate, in my opinion, a legitimate grief, having lost a brother or having lost a friend or whatever it may be. Are these points being addressed? And this is where it goes back to it being a human issue, because we don't hear anything from the human development aspect. We don't hear anything from the social transformation aspect. We only hear about the police department and the lawyers and these men who are being locked up.
Not the lawyers. One or two big mouth, as they say.
A few lawyers.
So, a quick answer.
Quick answer. No, it's not being solved. But one correction, I understand that they didn't attend the funeral.
Okay.
I actually have those two brothers as a client. Okay. I was asked by the mother to go intervene. And what was really amazing is that according to the law, by 7 days you should have been told if you'll be kept or not. So one brother was for sure given this paper, I have his document, for sure given that he will be going. And the law says not later than 7 days. The other brother was told he'll be released because according to reports, one is known to be involved in such activities, but the other one is not, right? But he's being painted with the same brother. 8 days later, I kept checking with the police, and then I said, oh, we encourage the next brother too. Can you imagine the anger? Because one brother is saying, look, my little brother not doing things. He not into that. And the mother and the brother is saying, Mr. Chester, tell me and release me, whatever. When I checked the list with CIB, they said, no, his name is not on the list, we'll release him. And then the following day, which is against his right, because they said within 7 days, 8 days later, he's issued the paper and he's detained. That's an unlawful detention, I would argue, before a court. Are we wrapping up? Because there were key things we didn't...
No. We're going to take a break.
And then we'll continue, because I want to talk about the Gazette and the actual legislation, and I want to point to you all every part of it that has been violated.
All right. Stay tuned. More Open Your Eyes after these messages.
When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Channel 5 introduces the Daily Obituaries. The Daily Obituaries will broadcast all death and funeral announcements and memorials to honor your loved one's life and memories. The Daily Obituaries airs on Channel 5 prior to the evening newscast, with subsequent repeats at 10 p.m. and 12 noon the following day. It will also be placed online on our social media platforms, all for a standard package fee. Celebrate their lives and memories with Channel 5's Daily Obituaries. Honor in life and reverence in death.
And welcome back to the second segment of our show, which we still have attorney and activist Audrey Matura on set with us. But we're going to be discussing what's next after the state of emergency. We're also going to allow her an opportunity, as you mentioned, prior to the commercial break, to discuss certain aspects of the law and the fact that, in your opinion, they have been violated along the way. Let's start there.
Can I just get, because we prefaced our first segment, did it really work?
No, I don't think it has really worked. It's a false sense of security. Tell me, how will it work when they come out? As far as I know, I was inquiring because I missed the news and the National Assembly debate on Friday, and I was trying to inquire, did they apply to extend it? And my answer that I received was no. Okay, what does that tell you? It tells you that all they wanted was to abuse the power of the Constitution by locking them up for 30 days with no real solution. The real solution is to get the evidence and convict these guys and put them away for the right reason. What they did was to just pick them up and put them away. You see, although they are criminals, you have to remember that you, the law enforcement, cannot act like criminals too. The dignity with which they don't treat others, you need to treat them, because you need to show them by example that there are right ways to do things, and that has not happened. It's high-handedness in their mind, and you have to go back to the psychology of it. In their mind, you are as gangster as I am, and you're only fighting me the force because you have it, but I will get back at you. But if you treat them with the dignity and say, man, like I tell you, I've been a prosecutor. I've convicted men for rape and murders. Those were my two staples. I could still go back at prison and they will not do me anything, or when they see me, they treat me with respect. Why? Because even though they pled not guilty, the evidence was there. You know, and I know that the evidence is there. You're locked up. But you know you were locked up through a fair process. You were allowed your attorney and everything. But when you don't do that with a person, there isn't a fair process, even if they did something. The thing, the natural human thing is that you know you got me the wrong way. You know they play this game fair. And what you want to do as law enforcement is not to just play these little games. And the other thing, they will say, you only come after 2 sets. Why you not come after the other 9? So the rivalry will get worse. It's like when a mother has 9 kids or 11 kids, you can't treat 2 better than the other or 2 worse than the other. You have to put the same rule for all of them. And that's not happening, and people don't want to have that discourse. The first thing, if you talk, is like, oh, you defend criminals, or this and that. At least they don't have no murder. At least I feel safe. It's a false sense of safety. Let's have the hard conversation. Let's look at where this is going and where it's not working. And I'm telling you, as a person who has been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, I've been in the media, and I'm an activist, I get to meet different people. I'm telling you, this will not work. You can put away these guys the right way.
Now, let's look at the legislation, because we've had new legislation. Is it a case of where that legislation is changing so quickly that people don't get an opportunity to digest and dissect it and then fight for this right thing to be done?
Let me tell you, it doesn't matter if people get to digest the legislation. This legislation, called the Crime Control and Criminal Justice Amendment Act, was propelled by the police, by the Ministry of National Security. They are the ones who put it in place. And William, they have not picked up one person under this law. This law is so sweet. Sweet in the sense that it makes it easy for law enforcement, bad in the sense that you can easily be dragged in with a dragnet, which is what has been happening with this state of emergency. Look, let me tell you how easy it is for you to be locked up under this law. It says, a person who is a gang member, or in order to gain an unlawful benefit professes to be a gang member when in fact he's not. You only say he's not. Whether by telling anyone that he's a gang member or otherwise suggests to anyone that he's a gang member, commits an offense by virtue of being such a member, or as the case may be, making such a profession, and is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years. And on any subsequent conviction, on indictment, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 25 years. Imagine how many of them have not gone on TV and acted like gang members. Same ones that they have locked up. Part 2, a person who is a gang leader commits an offense by virtue of being such a member and is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 25 years, and on a subsequent charge thereof to conviction on indictment to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 40 years. I don't even have to read the rest. They even have powers to put injunction on people suspected of being involved in crime. They even have the power to take away your property. And in the injunction, they can confine where you go and what you do. So they didn't need a state of emergency. If you know these are the guys, so why didn't you apply for the injunction? And under this law, I've done injunctions. Injunctions are not easy to get. Under this law, they changed the standard of what you go through to get an injunction to make it so much easy. Why didn't they do that? Can't be that the police, they don't know that this law exists when they pushed it. And this then would have meant that you wouldn't lock them up for 30 days. You're locking them up for good, and I mean for good, not for the rest of their lives. But you know what's to be locked up to 10 years, 25 years, 40 years? You hear how easy that is? So they're not serious. Let me tell you, we registered our phones so that we could track gang activity. Has it been used? You go talk with these guys, even police and so on. What about the recordings? There's just so many ways. They're not serious about crime. I'm sorry. Until I see that the beautiful laws that they pass, which are oppressive, draconian laws, but it's the law, we gave away so much rights under this law, you know, and that's still never enough. And we take away more rights again, we go on to the Constitution, and still not enough. And then there was this excuse that the reason we did not use the Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act to declare the state of emergency is because under that act, there has to be a crime commission in place. And so we shortcut it by going to the Constitution. Hello, that's an admission that you failed as your leadership. When you can't appoint a crime commission, I remember Mr. Michael Young, may he rest in peace, was the head of the crime commission. I remember Attorney Lisa Schumann was a member of it, and I don't know all the other members, but they're members of the community, and I know police have representation in it, and the judiciary. And if you're serious about crime, what is so hard to appoint another commission? And that commission had done an excellent report from like 2010 in which they were looking at how to address certain things. So those people wasted all that time and effort, and it was not put in place. So the problem is not finding answers. You know, people like say, so they criticize, what are the answers? I don't need to invent the answer. The answers have been there. You should be saying, let's force our leadership to do the answer.
But isn't it reflective of a bigger issue in the sense that you have all these commission reports and everything, the Gale report, the Crooks report, the
Crime
Commission report, and the research and the effort that is put into generating these particular reports, such that they can be implemented and we can actually see some kind of measurable progress. It sits on someone's desk and it languishes there, and well, we're still where we are today because nobody seems to want to put that into action.
But that's why I say it's a failed system. It's a failure. It's not that they don't have the answers. They have the answers. They don't have the political will. You see, putting in place those things does not give you the beautiful images of a press conference when you talk big and bad, big bad wolf. You know, we Belizeans have this way where we like act like, yes, we're the fight now, F this and them. That's empty air. There are those who will put in place actions, because some of those actions are short term, but the most effective ones are long term. I said 25 years ago, I remember when Prime Minister was then Minister of National Security, and he passed the first Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act. It wasn't called that then, it was called Crime Control and Something Act, and it has since changed name. And for the first time, he made it law that the police will be accompanied by the military in these hot zones. He called them hot zones, right? I was a reporter then. I was against it. I was simply against it because I didn't think that military should be in civilian territory. And that I believe that when you put people with guns in neighborhoods where children are, they become sensitized to that. Think about it. I didn't grow up in my neighborhood seeing guns. I grew up in my neighborhood running around and climbing trees. So my childhood is different. These kids grew up. These kids are now 25 years old, some of them, and some younger. For 25 years, people in these neighborhoods grew up seeing guns on the street. What do you think is the sensitization? I said then, implement the social reform. Had we done it then, wouldn't 25 years later we'll be talking about results? So we have to implement it now, so that if I live another 25 years, I will see the results. It's as simple as that. For 25 years, it did not work. I was one of the vocal opponents of having the military on the street. It's just until the other day they had removed them and then they put them back. It will not work. Think about you being a child and you grow up in your neighborhood, and the first thing when you wake up and you go to school, you see a police officer or you see military guns, and so you grow up thinking that's the norm. I, who am older, know that that's not the norm. So you grow up, I go in some of these neighborhoods, and the way these kids talk and act, it's a reflection of how sensitized they are to this gun culture. They know maybe people in the neighborhood that they hide a gun and then say they are the one in gun. And in their mind, why gun have to fight gun? They don't realize that this is not the genesis of how things should have been. It's really bad, and we're not looking back at what you're saying. The sociological, psychological aspect of the problem. We're dealing with human beings and we react. We develop, as the therapist will tell you, or the psychiatrist will tell you, your first 7 years are your formative years. It develops your character. What you see and learn in your first 7 years determine what you are later on. What we've reaped 25 years later from seeing guns on the street, this is the proof of it. If I could have done the surveys to show you where those kids grew up and where the checkpoints were with the police and the guns and everything, you would see that it matches. It mirrors it. You can't expect to have kids grow up with guns and expect them to want to go plant gardens. Impossible.
Now, as we look at, this winding down, supposedly, of the state of emergency because of the time aspect, unless there's a move by cabinet to extend it, what do you predict going forward happens now? Because you raised a point earlier where we've incarcerated people and they've not gone through the
due process,
and they're being released as well, no?
Right.
So you have that kind of complication of a system where you have some people who have been incarcerated for 10 years or more. I think I was looking at news, someone was 20 something years. You have the resentment aspect being built in now.
Yep.
So what next?
Well, let me tell you what I see. If you've been following up the news, there are at least 25 persons who have been waiting for their trial for murder, who have been released on bail. People don't understand why they have to be released on bail, but the Constitution says that you should have a trial within a reasonable time. All these people being released have been waiting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years for a trial. That is not fair. When you go try somebody after 10 years, after 5 years, we don't know the state of the evidence. Justice delayed is justice denied. That is so true. So you have to add these 25 now, which are supposedly all gang-related murders out on the street, along with another 64, 64 is in the Gazette, 64 that were locked up without due process for 30 days. And then look at it with the preference that is being shown for against 2 gangs, in favor of 9 gangs against 2 gangs. Because if you believe that the crime activity keeps going on a daily life, then you know that 2 are being suppressed right now and 9 are flourishing. So you know that whole turf thing, people cream off what they could. When you put that, what I say has been created by government and law enforcement is a worse state of affairs for us. Now, the average person don't want to stop and think, because I'm amazed that some of my friends or colleagues or acquaintances that are supposedly highly exposed and professional and educated have this approach, lock them up, whatever. And I said, you know what? I will accept them where they are because they do not understand the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that you've created now a cesspool for revenge, for resentment, for retaliation, as opposed to saying, you know what? I get you on the right way. All those guys that have been released on bail should have never languished so long in prison. The same police that are locking up those for 30 days are the same police that have to go and testify for those murders. We already saw the problem when witnesses don't want to come forward. We changed the law to make it easier to convict them, and we still don't get to convict them. This is how disgraceful it is. Clearly, the hard approach will not work. You have to go back to the root. You have to cut down crime. The deterrence is not there. We cannot get the conviction. If people look on it, it's like at home. If every time I do something bad, my mother tear me ass or punish me, trust me, and think twice to do that. But every time, if you just threaten, I want to beat you and you don't do it, I'll keep on doing it. And that's what's happening here. We've socialized ourselves, and there's this national psyche where we complain and we want quick, immediate band-aid, but we don't want to invest in the persistent efforts that we need to invest in.
Some people may argue that perception is reality. During the month of September, there was a decrease in the crime that we saw. So that
the violent crime, but not the on the surface. Right.
So people will look at that and say, well,
for how
that's
long?
proof. Now, do we, that it did work? And vindication for government to say that this is, however, going forward, when I was asking about your predictions, do we then see this around Christmas time? Do we see it at every Easter time?
Yeah.
Whenever there's something of importance for us as a community, do we then...
You have a point there. I could see that happening every time. That is why from now it needs to be challenged. You said what's going forward. I know that there will be attorneys who will challenge it. These guys have very solid cases, which takes me to the point that I wanted to make.
Quickly, because I recall a press conference in which the Deputy Commissioner, Chester Williams, had mentioned that essentially there were papers for the entire South Side. He had mentioned that.
Meaning papers what?
The what is decree, the declaration.
Oh, okay.
For the entire South Side, right? But this is specific to 2 particular neighborhoods. If this were to happen again in another part of Belize City on the South Side, where other members of the communities are being held in detention and what have you, and the entire aspect of it being a human rights issue and what have you, have you thought of it in that context as to what is going to happen next? I know you have your legal perspective, you have a human rights activist, but what happens in that context?
I believe it reaches a boiling point. I really believe so. And you know what's so sad? That the perception is like Southside is the worst. But it's not true. There are gangs in Northside, and worse yet, the gangs that we're not addressing are the ones in government that keep robbing us. It's so unjust that we cannot get Penner to be properly arrested and charged by the same police, but yet they quickly, and this affects these guys, you know, they quickly see how they pick up X, Y, and Z, gang leader. But how come even with the attempt by civilians to get a charge against Penner, it wasn't successful? How come we hear land transactions and we have the proof? This is not defamatory, we have the proof involving the Vegas, especially the then Deputy Prime Minister, who has then been laid to pasture instead of being investigated, arrested, and charged. So the disparity is great. So when we talk about gangs, one of them is a clique of people, where the definition is like a clique of people that do things, criminal things for the benefit, right? That's the same thing that's happening. So what is happening is the people in the street see it's me against you, and then you have to remember, these same politicians at some point come to these same street guys to get them to muscle votes. It's a reality. I'm not making that up. And so there are these brokering of power, you know, and depending on who's at the top, certain gangs get pressed more than the others. So, and these people see it. We who seemingly living a normal, cushioning life, or we think our life, we do not understand the deep undercurrents of corruption that's happening. And we are caught in the middle. There's corruption at the very low and corruption at the very high. And that's why I believe there's not the political will to solve it. I mean, I remember an election campaign, I think it was 2012, when a notorious gang leader who has since been killed, driving the vehicle of a minister with government license plate, picking up people to carry them to vote, you know? It's the hypocrisy and the duplicity of it. And so there will be this level of disrespect on both sides, and there'll be this level of retaliation, because if you really want to help these people, there's a way to do it. We have enough money. We had, might be able to say, to put in place certain measures. And I go back to say, we have to hit it at early childhood development. It has to go in the schools. Let's not pretend that when you're a little person, your first years aren't the most important. They are the most important.
Before we wrap, because we're
I need to get to this before we wrap. So I want you all to note this, right? They instituted the declaration or the proclamation under Section 18 of the Constitution. But here what Section 19 says. Section 19 is saying, if you're detained by virtue of this law, there are several things that must happen to you. First, within a reasonable time, but no more than 7 days after the commencement of your detention, you need to be told why you were detained. That's why we got these letters that, you know, which carry no weight. Because when they say you have to give the particulars, that's not particulars. And like I said before, if they say that because you're involved with drug possession and possession of firearms, then that was basis to carry you to court and convict you. So you can't just suppose, so that's very weak. The second thing they need to do is not more than 14 days after the commencement of their detention, a notification shall be published in the Gazette stating that he has been detained and giving particulars of the provision of the law under which his detention is made. So I have the Gazette here, right? The proclamation was made the 4th. This was gazetted until the 22nd. It's far beyond the 14 days. When the law says shall, it says shall be published in the Gazette.
That means
this
there's
is a
no
second
choice.
violation, right? And I have them right here. It's 64 names. I made sure I went to buy my Gazette. I was on another program. I even flagged it before. It was on the news. I said it's 18 days. The 14 days now. Well, clearly they don't think that they have to comply with the law, and this is part of the problem. You cannot be law enforcement and not comply with the law yourself, and this is the Constitution you're violating. You can't want to do a public emergency and not be prepared to follow the letter of the law to show that you've been fair. So now when there are the lawsuits, then they'll get vexed. But the reason it has to be challenged is on principle, not because you want criminals to be out there. My position is very simple. I want anybody involved in criminal activity to be properly convicted and put away. I don't want band-aid effects. And I want that on principle, since it's the first time we are using the Constitution, that the precedent we set cannot be a precedent where we disrespect and violate our Constitution. It was the most powerful arm that they used to get these guys. And if you're going to use the most powerful arm, you better use it good. Then it says the other thing that they need to do, right, is that within 30 days, there should be a review. Not later than 30 days, there should be a review of their detention. So
a review by whom?
By a panel set up by the Chief Justice. It says, where any question, sorry, let me go to my 19. I gotta tag them so that I don't have. Not more than 1 month after the commencement of his detention and thereafter, during his detention at intervals of not more than 3 months, his case shall be reviewed by an independent and impartial tribunal established by law and presided over by a person appointed by the Chief Justice from amongst persons who are legal practitioners. So listen, this is very critical. Before the 30 days was up, a panel should have been established to review their detention, not after the fact. So when I wrote the head of prison and say, I have the right to go see my client because he will at some point have to appear before this panel, they refused for me to see him. Listen what the other right they have. It says, the person that's locked up shall be afforded reasonable facilities for private communication and consultation with a legal practitioner of his choice, so that he shall be permitted to make representation to the tribunal appointed for the review of the case of the detained person. That tribunal should have already been appointed. And before I forget, this is another key question. You can be detained for 30 days within that time. I am being told that some people are being picked up 10 days before the 30 days is over, and they're being told they can be held for 30 days. No, the 30 days is clear, from the 4th to the 4th, if you put it that way. So if you are picked up the 3rd, that doesn't mean they can hold you for 30 days because the emergency is only for 30 days. So if you wanted to sweep them in, you had to sweep them in at the beginning, which brings us to another problem. It was enacted the 4th. By the 4th night into the 5th, people were rounded up and taken in. The regulations were not passed until the 7th. And under those regulations, there were people that were picked up that were not picked up in the area. So that part that deals with whether you are picked up in the area or not could not take effect before or the 4th. So those people, again, have a case against the law enforcement. That is why I don't know who they consulted legally, because fine, if even this they messed up, even this you're trying to implement, because it brings me back to the very one conclusion I had from the start. All they wanted to do was preventative detention, the shortcut way. And I was against the preventative detention when they tried to pass it in the 8th Amendment, because it will not work. I want due process and I want fairness. And those who say, oh, who cares about that? You never know when it will knock at your door. So-called decent people have suffered at the hands of abuse of legal authority and law enforcement. And we need to learn to be a just society where on principle we apply the law across the board. One of the tenements of our Constitution is that nobody is above the law. How we've been operating, politicians are above the law, and then the criminals are suppressed by the law. We need to change that culture where everybody is alike, and that's not happening.
All right. Well, Audrey, we want to thank you for joining us this morning. Obviously, this is a conversation that will be ongoing.
I was told that I would have had companion, that we would have had representative from the police. I would have loved to ask some of the questions to them.
Well, we'll work on that and perhaps get them to come and see what the next steps are from that part of the, the equation.
Okay.
So thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Anytime, anytime.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, it will be to look at whether the military and defense arms should be neutral. We'll be joined by Major Lloyd Jones. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.